I'm Roberto Baldwin, and this is Tomorrow Today's Sustainable Mobility Brief. The transportation world is evolving at a rate not seen in decades. The transition from fossil fuels to sustainable energy has brought with it some truly exciting opportunities, but also some confusion. I'll sift through the noise and share quick updates on the latest news, trends, and advancements that will impact our world for years to come. This week on the podcast, I have Vontier CEO Mark Morelli. Mark, thank you so much for joining me this morning. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Roberto.
Thank you. And, we're going to talk about something that I think a lot of people don't really think about. I think when they think gas stations and they think about charging stations as two separate entities. But the reality is that the established infrastructure for gas stations, even though when you think about gas stations, you think gas, Vontier is actually working with gas stations to help get them ready for the rise of EV adoption. Tell me a little bit about that.
Roberto, it's something that people don't think about. Every day, Vontier's products really enable the mobility ecosystem. We touch people's lives every day, but it's something that, that infrastructure is called the mobility ecosystem. It's where you get your cars gassed, fueled, charged, the infrastructure to get your cars and trucks washed, getting repaired. Vontier is a technology provider to that entire mobility ecosystem. And we've seen this evolution from a gas station to more of a convenience on the go. So what's happened there is, yes, you get your cars refueled. Yes, you can get your cars charged. That's also where you're getting your stop for fresh foods, for convenience items, getting your car washed. All these things, it's all coming together. And that infrastructure is very profitable and it is growing. And you'll see this in the United States. First of all, it's happening around the world. But you see this in these modern convenience store formats that are evolving. And so it's a very natural place to get your cars charged.
I go to the gas station, I'll go inside. I'm like, I'm thirsty, I want a snack. And the reality is, like, most of that money that location makes is from me wandering in the door. Is that true?
So what the convenience store operators are focused on is they're focused on what's called conversion. Conversion from pumping gas and going inside the store. Conversion from, sitting in your car for charging, for electric charging, and also coming inside the store. And there's a lot of loyalty programs that they're very interested in. There's a lot of fresh food and new food formats, but they make money off pumping gas. And, but they also make a lot of money at bringing you inside the store. So when you pull onto the site, the convenience store operator wants to own you on the site. They want you to think about getting a car wash and it accrues to the same payment program. And so it's super interesting to think about this. I know people don't think about this, but it is changing pretty dramatically. I mean, look, 7-Eleven bought a taco chain. So if you go into a new 7-Eleven format, you can have, a fresh taco made. You can pick up a bottle of wine because you're on the go. You're going to stop at your friend's house maybe for dinner later in the day, and you want a nice bottle of wine. And those are not things that you would typically think about on a convenience store. By the way, your conversion from electric charging inside the store is a really big uplift for these convenience operators.
Because you're charging, it takes longer than putting in gas. And even if that changes over the next 10, 15 years, there's still that amount of time that you're at this location that you're there. You're sort of captured.
It's super interesting to watch. And we study this globally. And so what we found is, like, we do a lot of business in electric charging in the Nordics, in Europe. And the reason why we've spent a lot of time in Oslo, that is because of the very high penetration rate for electric vehicles. Like, north of 90% of all new vehicles are sold in Norway are electric vehicles. And so if you want to go see what's the infrastructure look like when it's more grown up, go to Oslo. Like, 25% of the car park is already electrified. And so think about this. You now have your choice of where you're going to stop for electric charging. Where are you going to stop? And is super interesting. The convenience on the go formats are excellent places for people to get. And, 5 years ago, this was really hard to see. And it's really hard to manage because you're like, well, hang on a second. Do utilities play a major role? Because utilities own sort of the electricity infrastructure. Are they going to be the predominant format that's going to evolve? Well, it turns out utilities can play a role, and they do play a role, but you know what? They don't serve on the go customers very well. That's not really their business model. So what we saw emerge in the Nordics was these convenience store operators started offering a lot more attractive things for you to do while you're waiting, like fresh food formats that's beginning to evolve. You know what? You may not, stop at a convenience store and get, a pack of smokes and, and a soda, but you might get a fresh salad and a kombucha. Yeah, it just changes what the offerings might be to be more appealing, to that type clientele. And so they are seeing an uplift on conversion for electric charging. And the other thing is that these convenience store operators recognize they can now be charge point operators.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, like 5 years ago, this is really difficult to sort of imagine because when you went to charge, it was typically in a parking lot way off in a corner, and you just sat there for an hour or whatever. And it felt like there wasn't really a lot of these sort of charging companies weren't really thinking about, oh, we have these people are captured. We've captured these people. We should have a restaurant nearby or a service station or a convenience store, or, in some cases there was shopping nearby. But having, if I'm driving, when I drive up and down the state of California in my electric vehicle, I know specific places where I will stop because they have restaurants that I like. Because it's right there. It's within 20 feet of the charging station. And so your brain just sort of resets to that.
Roberto, it's such an interesting dynamic to see how this has evolved. And, not only that, think about the business model that is backing all this up. So charge point operators are a wonderful way to sort of enable this entire infrastructure. But what's also happening that it was really difficult to see 5 years ago, but now the trends are pretty clear. These convenience store operators, once you get enough people on your site and they're now coming, think about that interaction with the consumer. And by the way, if you're a grocery store chain or if you're selling coffee, the same kind of business model change is occurring. And what's happening is people invite somebody on their property to do charging. And I think that is going to be part of the infrastructure going forward. But a very interesting dynamic that is beginning to change is that once you start reaching certain levels of charging, then people start saying, hey, you know what? Why aren't I the charge point operator? I can be, like, if you are a convenience store owner, what started happening in the Nordics, what's now beginning to happen in the United States, is they're saying instead of inviting somebody else on the site to own the consumer, well, my business is owning the consumer. Why don't I have one payment transaction that can go for inside the store, for electric charging, for gas or car wash? They pay a lot of money in swipe fees for credit cards. Why do you have 4 swipes? Why can't that accrue to the same loyalty program? And you can start offering a free cup of coffee if you are charging and you come inside the store. Well, there's a whole set of very attractive economics around that are now playing out. And so these convenience store operators are starting to step in and saying, I can be the charge point operator. And the great thing about us is we enable this business model. We have a charging infrastructure platform. It's called Drives. It's got more than 100,000 plugs under management worldwide. That's the second leading most. And what it does is it enables whoever wants to be a charge point operator to be a charge point operator. It's that entire technology platform to be able to do that. So you can see how this really opens up that infrastructure, and ultimately it provides better choice for consumers. Because, I want to get a cup of coffee. I don't want to go to the back of a mall somewhere at night. I drive an electric vehicle. my wife will say, well, let's not stop there. It doesn't feel safe. And for me, I'm like, okay, I definitely want a cup of coffee, and I want a good cup of coffee, and you can get a great cup of coffee now at a convenience store, that freshly ground cup of coffee. So that whole infrastructure is changing pretty dramatically.
It makes so much sense economically for these places. I know that some of the larger truck stop operators, they're like, oh, we're going EV because they already have the infrastructure. They have convenience stores. Typically, they're attached to some sort of fast food restaurant or a Starbucks, and so it makes so much more sense for these convenience store operators to say, hey, we should get into this business as well because we already have the people who are gassing up. Let's get the people who are charging up as well.
Roberto, it's about on the go convenience. And as a consumer, we want safety. We want clean bathrooms. We want choice of different food venues. We want different services that, it's just that on the go stop. And these venues are very profitable. I mean, the folks in the convenience store business are making a lot. These are And just look at the announcements in the United States about the infrastructure build out. Look at Wawa, look at Sheetz, look at Quick Trip, look at Circle K, look at 7-Eleven. They're building out more of this infrastructure, and go visit a modern convenience store that, by the way, they're putting in more gas pumps, by the way, which we provide gas pumps through Gilbarco Veeder-Root, but we also have a leading infrastructure of that electric charging network. We have the leading infrastructure for car wash point of sale. So we're deeply embedded in this mobility ecosystem. We believe in this multi-fuel future, but it is very vibrant. It is changing to adapt to consumer needs. And we see it in different areas around the world, more grown up than in the US. But in the US, it's changing pretty rapidly and it's pretty dynamic.
So what are some of the roadblocks to adding charging to gas stations? I think people just think you buy a charging station and you just dump it there and you're good to go. But it's a little bit more complex than that.
It has been. And, part of it is, okay, well, first of all, who's going to come and charge? Because part of it is utilization. There had to be a big outlay of cash for an electric charger. A convenience store thinks about throughput and turnover of their space. So one of the constraints is how much space do you have and how are you going to allocate that space, particularly if there's not going to be utilization. But what's happening, by the way, this is not happening evenly across the country. There are pieces of the country, like in California, it's very different than in areas of Texas. But there are areas of Texas that the infrastructure is growing up. So there are more electric vehicles on the road. But I think you're an expert in this. You definitely know that there's not enough of this infrastructure, which is one of the major reasons why people don't buy a lot of electric vehicles. So a little bit it was, what's first, the chicken or the egg? So, but now, I think electric vehicles are definitely being more adopted, and that infrastructure is definitely being more needed. So utilization starts going up. So convenience store operators are interested in utilization because there's a profitability. And of course, there's government funding that plays a role. So we see a patchwork in different areas of the country. We definitely see a patchwork in different countries globally that are adopting these things. And we're the technology provider that provides the right technology depending on that geography as that equation tips more towards electric vehicles.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, I live in Northern California, so you can't swing a bat here without hitting a charging station. I mean, they're building a Tesla supercharging station like a block and a half from my house. So there's already EV Go. Like one exit over, like a mile and a half is an EA station. So I'm living in the area where there's a very high adoption of EV vehicles. And the rest of the country isn't there yet. And so, as more and more people buy cars here, we're getting a more dense infrastructure. And so I think it's, and this is typical, is what happens in California sort of seeps into the rest of the country, but it takes some time.
It definitely takes time. And I think California, if you go visit the Nordics or certain areas in Europe or even around London, you'll see a lot more of that infrastructure even built out more. So we've been witnessing these trends, and this is why we've been a leading technology provider for the Nordics. And a lot of our offerings have sort of spread word of mouth. Well, what works if you're a charge point operator for high reliability of charging? And now we're beginning offering payment solutions where you can have one transaction on site and that accrues to the same transaction. So we're seeing like really trends that consumers are going to have a lot more choice. And I think what you're living in your neighborhood, Roberto, and I drive a Tesla, so I stop at Tesla's charging stations, but that whole infrastructure is beginning to open. And what we've offered from the beginning, we've been really prioritizing is that open system architecture, because it doesn't matter what car you want. You just want that same level of convenience. You want that same level of high uptime and reliability. And you want to be able to have a taco, or you want to be able to get your cup of coffee of choice, or all those things. And what's happening now is there's more and more choice. And I think that's what it looks like grown up. That's what the vision of the future is. When it's grown up, consumers should have a choice. And that's what will make electric vehicles more thrive in the United States.
And I heard a little bit about charging stations healing themselves with artificial intelligence, with AI. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, once the stations are there, we've some of the charging station suppliers have had some issues, especially early days, with their charging stations going down, which leads to frustration, which leads to people wondering why they bought an EV in the first place if they can't charge it. Can you let's talk a little bit about what technology is doing to help make the uptime on these stations better.
So it's something that we have focused on a lot. And we know that charge point operators that use our platform and also work through some of the hardware challenges, they can achieve very high uptime. And we think that's what everybody is aspiring to. But when you go to the AI machine learning question, I mean, that's a huge aspect. And our infrastructure is doubling every year, but we have more than a terawatt of energy going through the chargers. So think of all that data that you can collect on uptime. We know a lot about, and by the way, we work with over 500 different charger manufacturers too, and different cars. So think of all that data that you can collect on an open system architecture, and you can use that for uptime. We absolutely use AI machine learning around creating a more of an uptime and experience for the consumer and that charge point operator. So it's something as we get more and more data, we're able to mine that data and create better experiences for folks. So it's something that snowballs over time, but we've got a great leg up with the data lakes that we're drawing off today. And it's really exciting to see what you can do with this infrastructure when you can leverage all of that data into better uptime. And there's no question that, you can do a remote start. You can do a lot of self-healing on the charger and the infrastructure network. So that people need us when the infrastructure is more grown up. They didn't need us so much when you just have a couple chargers and you're able to manually be in front of them. But when you're building up that infrastructure, when you're putting 1,000, 2,000 chargers out there, you need the technologies that we're providing, and we're getting better at it every day.
Well, you could use the AI to determine, even weather events where you're like, okay, this happened before during this type of weather event. Let's, make sure that these systems are working correctly ahead of that, which is something that would be really difficult to do because you wouldn't, you'd be trying to figure it out manually. And you're also trying to do that on thousands upon thousands of charging stations. Whereas with AI, you'd be able to do it and sort of deploy it.
Well, not only that, Roberto, think about the energy demands and think about the grid availability to provide those energy demands and what's going to happen when you're able to predict a surge and how are you going to be able to manage all that. The use cases here are phenomenal when it comes to AI machine learning. So yeah, weather is a great one too. In the Nordics, people don't think, look, it's a lot colder there. Your charge is going to be a different charge than it's going to be in Southern California. So, there is a lot of and tax code reasons and changes with patterns of consumers, on how they might ebb and flow during a day or a week or time of year. I mean, all those things are really, really relevant use cases that can be mined on and can be offered for a better consumer experience.
Yeah, I think a great. I mean, it was just the Thanksgiving holiday, and that is one of the number one travel days of the year, and that's those charging stations along a route, main corridor. They're going to be utilized wildly differently than the middle of the week in the middle of September.
And with our software, you can reserve a charger,
which is nice.
I mean, so think about areas where the patterns of usage might be, oh my gosh, well, how do I know, if I'm going to have a charger? First of all, do I even know if the chargers are going to be up? And then can I have a reservation to make? So when it's a critical resource like this, and as it's beginning to grow up, these are all the consumer problems that are out there that, technology is very well suited to be able to solve.
And now let's look a little bit beyond the gas station and how mechanics, auto shop, how do they change in this EV world? Because we hear a lot about the loss of revenue on oil changes. I need a new steering pump. I need a new a new fuel pump. I need a new a heater core. And the reality is, first of all, it's going to be decades and decades before gas cars go away, but eventually it's going to be the majority EVs. How do they adapt to the EV world?
So yeah, really interesting question. And it's something that we've studied a lot. And it's been super interesting because I think there was this perception, well, I have an electric vehicle. I just don't need to get it repaired. Well, and I think, the mentality around that is, less moving parts. Yes, I don't have to change the oil. I think there's some very obvious things to be able to point to. But Roberto, go look at the insurance costs for these vehicles. I mean, they're very complicated vehicles where you're also opening up new opportunities for repair. I mean, think of the number of cameras you have in the vehicle, and everything has to work together. So I think the thing that people have sort of overlooked is that repairs are more complicated and you're going to need more tools and capability. And by the way, the service technicians have to learn a whole new sophistication, and all that costs money. And so, yes, ICE vehicles are going to be around for a long period of time. The average age of the car park in the United States is growing. It's like 12 and a half years, and it keeps getting longer and longer because it's expensive to afford a new vehicle, whether it's EV or not. And so people are stretching out their assets for longer. And so those assets are going to be repaired for a long period of time. But when you go study electrification, what happens with the technician's toolbox is their toolbox actually gets bigger. You might need less of some wrenches, but you're going to need more on battery diagnostics. You're going to be more on ADAS repair type tools. And so what happens to the repair toolkit is actually gets bigger, and the technician's capabilities also need a stretch. So repair doesn't go away. Repair is more complicated, and you can go to places with more of a established electric vehicle car park, and we do studies on this. And you say, hey, this is not a no-brainer. It doesn't go away. It actually gets more complicated, and there needs to be more tools and capabilities that need to be enabled here. And we do this through our Matco Tools business, which is a leading provider in the United States. We sell to service technicians. So we're beginning, we offered in our Matco Expo last year sort of this repair shop of the future where it starts showing, how do electric vehicles get serviced and repaired.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. This has been a great, and as someone who drives up and who road trips probably more than the average person, it's good to know that there's someone out there helping those service stations get ready for people like me, across the nation as EV adoption increases.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Roberto, we started the conversation and people don't really think about this stuff, but we're very passionate about it. The mobility ecosystem, we see it evolving into this connected mobility ecosystem of like mobility ecosystem 4.0. And we just launched an ebook on this. I think people have thought about, all of these changes that occur with Internet of Things. But, it's all coming to the mobility ecosystem. And we're really excited to be in the center of all that. People don't think about a lot, but we can really enable mobility, whether it's about pumping gas or going to electrification. We're part of all that infrastructure, and we believe in this multi-fuel future. And it's something we're really passionate about. So we're really excited to talk about it.
For more information about the evolution of sustainability, head on over to sustainablecareers.sae.org. There you can learn about the latest EV announcements from the Los Angeles Auto Show, including the unveiling of the Hyundai Ioniq 9. Be sure to subscribe and listen every week on your favorite podcast platform.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.